What's going on? Welcome to Journey Church Online. If you're new around here and I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet, my name is Chuck Van Hook. I'm the online pastor here at Journey, and I'm excited to be able to worship with you today. So one of the shows that my family and I love to watch, that we've been watching a lot of over the holidays, is a show called The Goldbergs. If you haven't seen it, it's about a family set in the 80s. The main character's name is Adam. He starts off in middle school, and kind of that's where we're at in this series right now. And the other day we were watching this episode, and it was about gym class. You remember gym class back in the day where you actually got to play dodgeball with like the rubber ball that actually hurt? You felt some pain when you got hit with it, or you played basketball, or you did soccer or football, or whatever sports things you did, team sports. There was always that kind of awkward moment at the beginning where the coach would pick two team captains, and then you've got to divvy out and pick your teams, right? If you remember that and it was a great experience for you, then that probably means that you were somewhat athletic, or you at least looked the part, or you just had friends that were athletic and you got picked at the top of the ladder, right? But for others of us who kind of have a not so fond memory of picking teams in gym class, we were kind of down there at the bottom of the barrel. You know, for me, I was like 5'2" until I was like in 11th grade. So if anytime we played basketball, I was the bottom tier. I was 1 or 2 towards the bottom. It was never fun. It's never fun being picked at the bottom of the barrel. It's great when you're up top and you get chosen and you get picked up front. That makes you feel great. Isn't it amazing that we serve a God? We have a God who chooses us. And as we continue in Colossians chapter 3 today, we're going to join Chris for part 3 of this message and talk about just life and the life that God chooses us for, the life that God calls us to. Let's join Chris.
So let's say there's a guy. Why don't we just call him Guy? A couple of weeks to prepare for this talk. That's the amount of creativity that I'm bringing to the table. So there's this guy named Guy, and Guy splashes down on planet Earth in kind of a weird situation. When he is born, he has got a mom who is not in a healthy place, a dad, or maybe we should say the two people that participated to bring about his birth are both in a mess. And as a result, they decide they don't want to keep him. That's more work, more responsibility, more money than they're willing to put forth. So they hand him off to the state or the local authorities, and then he gets shuffled around for a while. And then one day there's this couple, and they're not able to have children on their own, and they're hoping and dreaming and praying, and they run across him, and they've been looking for a little while, and they meet this young man, and as soon as they see him, they are head over heels, like over the moon, crazy about him. That's the one. That is the answer to their prayers, and so they choose this child and adopt him and begin to raise him. And as he's growing up, he's like any boy. He's got a lot of boy in him. He does a lot of stuff. But man, this couple, they're not rich, but they take great care. They feed and they clothe. They care for him well. They raise him to have some values. They've got some principles in place in their life to help him have the best chance at a life that is going to be remarkable. And as he grows up, he learns from them and grows from them, and he finds some success, he finds some struggle, but all in all, such a better life. But then when he gets like out of high school and starting into manhood, he gets really curious, and he's a little frustrated, just to be honest, because he's grown up with these parents, and these parents got some rules and stuff, and And like a lot of teenagers, he doesn't need that or doesn't want that in his life, or at least he thinks he doesn't. And he gets curious and he decides, and he's got a little wild hair, and he starts doing a little research, spends a little bit of money. He says, I'm going to find out who my real parents are. And so he finds out a little bit of information. All he has is a place of birth, and starts running things down and finds out some things about the person who bore him. And he goes to find her, the person he would have called his mom. And as he does that, he figures out a location. Then he starts checking out things with his dad, or the person he might call his dad. And as he works his way back to them, one day he finds himself in this small town looking for a guy that he thinks he has a right name, but he doesn't know anything else. So he goes to the local store, little convenience store, and he asks, and the man inside, he said, hey, do you know this man? And the guy inside says, who wants to know? And he's like, well, I do. And he goes, why do you want to know? And it just seemed sketchy, and it wouldn't give him any information. And then he said, well, the only thing I can tell you is if you want to know more about him, you probably ought to check at the local bar. Well, that set him in motion, and he goes to the local bar in the morning. It's just opening up. And the person there, he says, hey, do you know this person? Who wants to know? And he goes, well, I do. Well, who are you? And he said, well, I'm Guy, and I'm looking for somebody who might be my dad. Why do you want to know? He owe you something. It's a sketchy. Finds out a little more information, goes to the local hardware store, gets a little information. Finally, he has at least a thought. And he goes to this horrible location, just this shack, this horrible place. 10:30 in the morning, knocks on the door. This guy who is completely wasted at 10:30 in the morning. He's just drunk off his feet, opens the door, and he says, hey, I think you may be my dad. Well, there's you go. Good morning. As they sit down together, the first question is, what do you want from me? He said, well, I didn't really want anything. I just want to know if you're my dad. I'd like to know who you are. They begin to have a conversation. It doesn't take long before it lands in this place. I didn't want you then, and I don't want you now. So he leaves. So he starts the quest for the person who might be called his mom, and he finds her, except she's nowhere near. She's a long way across the country, and when he goes out to find her, what he finds is not a beautiful experience either. There's all kinds of drugs involved, and there's some ugly depths into some adult entertainment industry. And as he finds that, you would sort of think he would be so appalled or so repellent to that he would just give up and go to something better. But he didn't. As a matter of fact, over the long haul, he kind of got absorbed in that world. He ended up involved in the drug world. He involved in the adult entertainment world. It just goes downhill quickly. Now, I tell you that whole thing about Guy to ask you this question. Don't imagine what life was for Guy, or for the person they might have called his father or might have called his mother. Let's go back to the people who actually chose him. What do you think this process is like for them? As every now and then they get a little bit of correspondence from him and they find out what he's doing. I'm sure they don't know the full depths of it. Can you imagine what they're thinking right now? How they feel about his life? What would you be feeling? And if any of your statements are like heartbroken, frustrated, angry, overwhelmed, any of those things, I would completely agree. They didn't just choose him because they wanted to take him out of something. They chose him because they had dreams and aspirations. They've tried to set him up for a future that he can win. And now they see him wasting that away and involved in so many things. You can imagine their frustration. We are right in the middle of a series called Don't Let the Door Hit You. And the whole principle is to say that sometimes we have to do away with old things. And really this week, our goal is to say, what is life like on the other side of the door? What is life like after the old times are gone? After you've walked through the doorway? Well, for this guy, his is completely changed. The door has hit him way too hard. We've talked about it like this from the passage of Scripture in Colossians chapter 3. We've said there is a life that God intends for us. We might call it the with God life. And it is God and us together. God who has chosen us. As a matter of fact, listen to this verse in Colossians 3:12. It says, since God chose you to be holy people he loves. It starts with that mindset that you weren't an accident, that God chose you. You weren't just born into something. You weren't just called. He chose you, and for a reason, because he wants to make you into something, and he wants to take you with him in this process. But over the course of time, so many of us kind of veer off and we choose our own life and we go our own way. And there's all these verses in Colossians 3 that begin to nail this issue down. They begin to go back and say, the writer says, so stay completely away from some things. Have nothing to do, for instance, with sexual immorality or impurity or lust or evil desires. Just stay away from them. Just like the parents of Guy would say, hey, don't get in the middle of that. We've got such dreams for you. And you're going to cash those in or get rid of those for something so much less. And it's the way God feels about us. It even says that at one point, because of these things, God's anger is stirred. And his anger is not anger at you, it's anger for you because he has such high intentions, such big dreams. The problem is when we step away from this with God life to this my own life, that's where we always end up. Here's the truth of the matter. We'll say it this way. Jesus didn't die so that you wouldn't have to die. That wasn't his goal. He didn't die so you didn't have to. He died so that you could have a true, meaningful, beneficial life. He died so that you would have a way to truly live. That's his goal for you. How's that working for you right now? Do you feel like the life you are living is paying off that way? Does it feel like you are walking with God toward a future, toward your hopes and dreams, towards what he could make for you? Well, he has a lot to say about that. But I think the bigger question is, sometimes it's so easy in a world that drags you. You don't have to try to go this direction in your life. It will happen without any effort. Your logical drift will take you away from God. It's something we fight constantly. Are you fighting that constantly? As a result, sometimes when we drift away from those things, God said, set your mind on new realities from heaven. He said, think on the things of heaven, not just the things of earth. He's saying, listen, there's a completely different life, but you don't dabble in it. He's saying, since the door has swung, live a new life. The other life that you'll be pulled for, you know what it'll do? It will keep you consumed with things. In these days, you know what it will? It'll consume your thoughts with what's going on in our political world. It'll consume your thoughts and fears with what's going on physically in our health world. It'll consume your thoughts with polarized, divisive things. And he's just saying, listen, if you're not careful, you will consume so much of those that they will consume you. And he said, I'm not saying those things are all good or all bad. I'm just saying that I called you for more. I've chosen you for a better life than that. And you don't have to stay there. Set your sights on something greater because I chose you for something more. So here's my question. Do you know you've been chosen? Are you living today like someone who has been chosen? Are you finding yourself consumed with all the things of this earth and very little of the things from a higher calling? Because if you are, you're probably exhausted right now. If you are, you're probably disillusioned right now. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person, man. That is just the course of normal life. But I'm just telling you, we don't have to finish the day that way. And that's the good news.
You know, that is a rough story. That's a rough situation to hear about. And as a father of adopted twin boys, that is probably one of my biggest fears for my boys, but also just for me and kind of how I would deal with that and how all that would play out in my life. We like to look and see stories like that and think, oh man, never me. I would never be in that situation. I would never act like that. We do that when we read scripture. At least I do anyway. I don't know about anybody else, but as I read through scripture, I see the Israelites, right, in the Old Testament, and how they're God's chosen people. He's got all of these things set before him. He's got the promised land set out. He's got this huge plan for them. And what do? They go and screw it up over and over and over again. And God continues to bless them and lead them in the right direction. And they just keep on messing up. They just keep on acting like they've not been chosen. Even in the New Testament, we see that with Jesus and the disciples. We see the lack of faith, the questioning. We see Peter. We're just like, Peter, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You are chosen, the rock. Jesus is walking with you, teaching you. You are going to go and change the world. What are you doing? And we have that mentality. Maybe you're in the situation where you're having that feeling as a parent, and you've got kids, and maybe they've walked away from you, or maybe you're on the other side. Maybe you are the one that has walked away and acting like you're not chosen. And when are we going to realize that as Christ followers, we have been chosen by God, right? We've been adopted into that family. It's time for us to start acting like and living like we are chosen, because we are. What's holding you back?
So we've been working through these verses in Colossians chapter 3. They have been so meaningful to me. I know a lot of you have chosen to go and sign up for our daily devotionals or that come 3 times a week to you. I hope that's been a help for you. It's been so meaningful to me to read through those and keep my mind on these things. Let me show you a couple of verses that we're going to land on today. Verse 10, it says, put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. The key to that is, listen, once you're through the door, we want you to learn to know and be like your Creator. To know Him and be like Him takes some time. It takes some effort. It's giving us a feeling this doesn't happen instantaneously. Just calling Him your God doesn't change that to know Him. But if you were going to know Him, He gives us some imagery to help understand. Matter of fact, He would say it this way: since you have been chosen by Him, since you have been loved by Him, then live like it. Get to know Him. You are loved, live like it. That is the challenge for today. The next verse goes into this very odd little passage. It says, in this new life, it doesn't matter if you're Jew or Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, because that's how we separate people these days. Evidently, I don't know why that. Barbaric or uncivilized, slave or free, Christ is all that matters, and He lives in all of us. If we could summarize that verse, it would say this: it doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter how you got here. What matters is that you got here. You are loved. Live like it, no matter where you come from. Now listen, the reason that verse is there is because we're going to make excuses in a minute of why we don't do what we do, but you don't know where I came from. You don't know what my life's been like. And He's saying before you can even make the excuses, I do know. I made you, and it's all good. Christ is what matters. The next verse says this: since God chose you, we started with this a minute ago, to be holy people He loves. He then gives us the next line, then clothe yourself. You must clothe yourself. There's this whole picture that He's saying, listen, I want you, if you're going to know your Creator and be like Him, I'm going to tell you how to clothe yourself so that you will be like Him. If you turn on a ball game this afternoon, if you're a football fan, you're going to notice it's easy to tell who's on which team by what they're wearing. Matter of fact, a lot of things in life, you can do that. You can tell. Matter of fact, I've clothed myself today with a little Journey hoodie. And the reason I have is because I love Journey Church, but it's easy to identify me as the guy who might belong on this video. And so I would just say to you, He comes around and says, so clothe yourself with what? And then He begins to dig into this. He said, clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. He lands and says, I don't want you just to clothe yourself with something. I'm not just saying before you leave home, put something on, although if He had said that, that's good advice. Put something on. The world is grateful. But He's saying, listen, here's how I want you to clothe yourself. If you want to know and be like your Creator, that with God life, I'm telling you, this is what will be evident in your life. This is what will denote you as on the team with Him, as walking with Him. It becomes incredibly important for us to understand. And then He gives us this added little challenge at the end. He said, I want you to also make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. He gives us all of these words. As you look at the list that He gives, they're kind of an odd list. If you want to walk with God, He starts with this one. He said, first, I want you to have tender-hearted mercy. What does that even mean? That one's a weird one. I tell you, a word that I might use for that is the word compassion. To have tender-hearted mercy literally is saying that you care what others are going through. It's not just you going through your life, but you slow down your life enough to care, regardless of what got them there, regardless of why they're in that spot. Sometimes I can have compassion, but man, I have to run through a list and go, well, if you just, get a job, or if you just gotten an education, or if you'd just been more responsible. And most of those things I say because they make me feel better about me. But compassion or tender-hearted mercy is literally saying, no matter how you land here, I care about you. It's a stretch for a lot of us. He didn't stop with tender-hearted mercy. The second one he goes to is kindness. Kindness is literally when you loan someone your strength. Sometimes kindness has a weakness piece. When we think about it, kindness is just the opposite of that. Kindness is when I look at someone else and I go, I could loan you my strength. It's like seeing somebody in the middle of a busy intersection with their car stopped, out of gas or broken down, and you pull yours to the side and you jump out and you help push them. You're loaning them part of your strength. That's what kindness is. It's recognizing where they are and realizing that I can offer something to it. Kindness isn't weakness. Kindness cannot happen without strength. The third one, humility. Humility seems like one of those that's pretty easy to explain. Humility is just seeing yourself the way you really are. Not seeing yourself the way you wish everybody saw you, not seeing yourself the way you wish you were, seeing yourself the way you really are. All of these things he's talking about as we clothe ourselves with them is talking about in relation to other people. It's seeing ourselves in relation to other people in a way that we really honestly are, not taking for granted. Humility gives us the ability to approach one another as peers, not as I'm better than, not as I'm stronger than. To approach with humility means we look each other eye to eye. It means people who are very different than me, that I look at them and I see them as an equal before God. And you know what that means? That I am nothing outside of God's provision. There's nothing in me that can man up, that can bow up, that can ramp up, because the truth is all of us are the same, that without God, we're nothing. When we approach people with humility, we clothe ourselves with it. It changes our life and it changes the people around us. The next one is the word gentleness. That's one we don't throw around in every circle. Gentleness simply says, I will adjust for your benefit. I will adjust. Gentleness, once again, seems to be a weakness kind of statement, but it's the opposite of weakness. Now, I have a 2-pound, 8-ounce puppy that we have added to our home. My son has about a 60-pound dog. They play together, and it's remarkable to watch. This big dog could, in one bite, swallow my dog, and I would be really bummed by that. But it's weird to watch him come down to the puppy's level, and even though he could crush them, he softens. He is gentle with him. You know what gentleness is? It is that with the same physical attributes, I could reach down and pick up a contact lens with my finger, or I could reach down and pick up a bowling ball. I have the same amount of force, but I adjust it based on the target. I adjust. Gentleness literally says that I will adjust for your benefit. While I could overwhelm, while I could hijack everything that's going on around me, I will adjust for your benefit. That's the beauty of gentleness. Patience is the next one. Patience, we'll define it this way, as the decision to go the speed of another person. Patience is the decision. Let me just say that. Patience isn't God-given. Patience isn't something you were born with. By the way, if you don't believe it, go take care of a baby. Patience isn't something you're born. It is a decision. It is a decision over and over. It's a decision every day. It's a decision many times a day. It is the decision that I'll go the speed of another person. Even talking about it kind of ticks some of us off. It's like, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm not patient. I know, but if you are clothed with Christ, it is something He is trying to make you. If you are going without God, you're going to always show up and say, it's all about me. It's about my speed. You speed up, get out of my way. But the with God life, clothing yourself to be like your Creator, it means that will become evident in your life. That's what God is trying to do in you, and there's a reason for it. The last one is forgiveness. Forgiveness is just to pardon unconditionally. Forgiveness is such a tough thing because there's always that they don't deserve my forgiveness to be ramped in. And for a lot of us, this is a very difficult issue. To forgive often feels like we're letting somebody off, but it's really not. Forgiveness is just to pardon unconditionally, and it gives us a little bit more information with this one. It doesn't say forgive, it says forgive like you've been forgiven. And that's the key. It's this little reminder that you didn't deserve, that I don't deserve. The forgiveness that God has granted toward me wasn't because one day he looked down and said, I think you've done enough. Just the opposite. He looked down at me and said, you can never do enough, so I'll do everything. And forgiveness means that we do that. If we live without forgiveness, we are never going to be clothed the way we're supposed to be clothed. So would you look at that whole list? We'll just put them here on one picture. Tender-hearted mercy, or compassion, maybe we'd say, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, and forgiveness. There's quite a list. And if we could just be, I don't know, more honest than probably what we're supposed to be, like at church, you know. When I look at that list, there's two things I do. I go one, as a guy, and I don't know how it is if you're not a guy. I've only been a guy pretty much the whole time I've been alive. But as a guy, I just go, man, all of those are such wimp-like characteristics. I mean, as a guy, I don't go, ooh, that's what I'm striving for. Those don't seem to come natural, but not just for guys, for a lot of us. Those aren't very easy things. You don't go, whoa, look at those. Let's all become that. There's another piece of it. There's a piece of me that says, how do you get anything done? Like, I got stuff. I've got a things to do list. How do you get through life if everything is about compassion and kindness and humility, and if it's gentleness means I'm scaling it down, or patience means I'm going at somebody else's speed? How do I do that and still get what I need done? And forgiveness, there's a lot to forgive, and there's a lot of people who don't deserve forgiveness. And how do I ever get through life that way? And I'll tell you what really rings true with me. It's not that I think this should be done just because it says it should be done. I'll tell you, the who said it means a lot more to me. The guy who wrote this letter is a guy who wrote letters to churches and went and started churches all around the Mediterranean rim. And as he did that, went through these incredible things in life. And I'm just going to tell you, the guy who wrote these words was way more successful than you or me will ever be. You say, well, you don't know what's in the plans for me. I know what's in the plans for you enough to say this. 2,000 years from now, we're not going to be talking about your story probably. But I started a business 2,000 years from now, we're not going to be talking about your business. We're not going to be reading your diary. Today we're reading the letter from a guy who wrote this 2,000 years ago. I don't think any of us are going to top that. Can I just tell you a couple more things about this guy? This was a type A, gotta get it done, make it happen kind of guy. This wasn't some guy sitting in a monastery kind of pinning some stuff between, eating some grapes. That wasn't him at all. This was a guy who had a crazy life. This was a guy who once got on a ship that no intelligent human being would get on to go places to accomplish things that had no benefit for him. He was shipwrecked. He was snake bit. He was stoned, and not the kind that people like today, the other kind. He was beaten within an inch of his life and eventually died for this cause. This is a guy who brought to the table a pretty good resume, and long before he was a follower of Christ, was somebody who got things done in a very different direction, and he killed Christians. Of all the people on planet Earth to talk about tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, and forgiveness, this would be the last guy ever. If you say, those things just don't fit me, or I could never, and that's not the way I was born, you're in good company with him. That's why he said before you started, it doesn't matter where you came from or how you're born or how you're wired. The with God life will lead to these things. If you clothe yourself with him, that's what will happen. Now, if you're like me, I say some of those things look good to me and some of those things look not just difficult, but they don't look all that attractive. Can I just say, in the world in which we live, they are what is missing. Can you imagine what our world would be like if those who follow Christ had these as our calling card? Had these as the way we clothe ourselves every morning? If every day when we got up we said, God, please would you allow me this day to have compassion toward those I see, to see them where they are without judging how they got there and love them in that place. To say that I will offer my strength to others, that's kindness. God, help me with that. Give me the benefit of that today with humility, not to look and say, how can I tell you how important I am so you will see me as more? But rather than that, how can I put that stuff behind me and understand that in God's eyes, we are all exactly the same. Even the idiots of the world, even those you think are crazy, even those that you think are losing it, even those who are getting in your way, even those who are stumbling in their life, with humility to say, outside of the grace of God, we all end up in the same place. And with gentleness, I move at your speed, I move at your strength because you're more important to me. Because the truth is that's exactly what God has done for us. It's exactly the life he's given us. I will forgive not because you did something so good, but because I have been forgiven and I did nothing to deserve it. I will just emulate that. In my life, I've seen Christianity represented a lot of ways. I remember a big chunk of my life, every sporting event you saw like this guy on the screen somewhere. Almost every big event, not just sporting, he showed up somewhere. And then we see all kinds of flashes of pseudo-Christians across our world. Sometimes you see somebody with their signs and it looks a little bit like this. And somehow it's supposed to make us feel better. Can I just say this to some of you who are watching? The reason that you dropped out of church a long time ago was some of these things. That if Christianity were the clothed thing that we just talked about, you might have stuck with it, but the truth is you saw a lot of people who spewed a lot of Christian cliches and had a lot of bumper stickers, who had a lot of venom coming out, and they didn't live out the Christianity they talked about, and it's why some of you gave up. And can I just say, as probably one of those people you might have looked at, man, I'm sorry. This is not the way. Hey, I'm afraid that sometimes we who represent Christ represent him poorly. That sometimes we're so busy clothing ourselves in our agenda, in the point we want to make, that we miss our purpose in life. And for some of you who are just checking back in, and maybe weighing out, is Christianity something I would even consider? Is church something I would even be involved in? I just want to say, if you check it out, you're going to find some hypocrisy in it, just like you do outside of it. There are some of us who are trying to learn and not doing well. There's some who are sitting far from God, even though we claim God as our Savior. But our goal, and as a church, our goal is that we clothe ourselves in a new way of life, to allow God to make us into something greater. Here's the crazy thing. When Jesus came, he said it's our love that would be our defining mark. He said, by this will they know you're my disciples, the way you love one another. Well, can I just give you the truth about that? We kind of suck at that. Man, we've got to improve at that. The good news is we don't have to stay that way. The problem is often when we say that, it doesn't even sound like something very appealing. It's like, man, I don't want to do that. That sounds like a lot of work and a lot of adjustment, and a lot of time, and I'm sick of people, and I'm sick of everything else. And I just want to say, the life that God has set for you is dependent on those things. That if you can't love the people God created, then you cannot know the Creator. You cannot be like and live this with God life outside of it. But can I just say this? You also can't know the life on the other side of the door that you were intended. God has something so good for us. I'll just finish with this. When Jesus came, we look at those pictures. We look at people who've all got a point to make. Jesus didn't come to make a point. He came to make a difference. And sometimes I feel like in Christianity, our number one goal is to make a point. Hey, we're right and everybody needs to know. We got it figured out and you don't. And can I just tell you this? You can live your whole life trying to make a point, but you'll probably never make a difference. But when we clothe ourselves in humility and gentleness and forgiveness, when we're willing to move at the pace of someone else, when we're willing to show kindness because kindness has been shown to us, when we forgive as we've been forgiven, it is an attractive thing and it draws people to us, but it doesn't draw people to us. It draws people to Christ because in a dark world, that is a light thing and it will be noticed. Can I just encourage you? We don't have to be consumed with the crazy of this world. God has chosen us, and because he's chosen us, we can live like it. I just want to say, you don't have to live in downward spiral today. And you may be feeling that. Can I just give you some words, not mine? Set your sights on the heavenly realities. Think on the things of heaven, not the things of earth. Clothe yourself in these things. Don't underestimate what God could do tomorrow. You know who it'll change? If you do that, the people who will notice first, the people who are closest to you. For some of us who can raise up so quick with our wife or our husband or our kids or the people we work with, for some of us who have so many excuses but you don't know my surroundings, I just want to tell you the guy who wrote these words experienced surroundings we would never dream of, and he lived it out, and because he did 2,000 years later, he is still making a difference, and God wants to do that through you. Would you let me pray for you? So God, this morning, man, there's so much crazy in the world, and it just rings in my head. And if I don't do something, I will become like what I'm watching and listening to. It seems desperate, and it makes me desperate, and I just refuse to live that way. So as I try to become like my Creator, as I become one who has been chosen and loved, would you help me live like it today? Would you offer in my life today, for my friends, for my family, for the people in my neighborhood, for the people I bump into in day-to-day life, would you help me exhibit and clothe myself the way you would so that people would recognize that you're changing me? Would you help me not to make a point because I've got a point to make, but would you help me make a difference in a broken world and let me be part of the answer instead of just the guy who likes to point out the problem? Because that would be so much better life. I ask it because you said I could, and because you love me, and because you're with me. Amen.